Hello and welcome to episode number 76. Today is January 18, 2021. I'm your host Sree Iyer and joining me is Sridhar Tityalaji. Sridharji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Namaskar, good morning, and happy Monday. In United States, it is the Martin Luther King's Day, so happy Martin Luther King's Day.
Yes, and for a few, today is a holiday, so some of them are enjoying an extended weekend. And what better than to wake up to Sree and Sree? And we have a very long list of important items to cover today. We're going to jump right in. We'll start with the inauguration that is about to happen on the 21st or 20th. I'm not even sure of the
20th,
date.
20th,
20th. 20th in 2 days from now, and looks like Washington DC is looking like a fortress. That is just putting it mildly. So let's take it away. Let's start from there, Sridharji. So why don't we start at what is going to happen on the 20th? And we hear that President Trump is not going to be there, but Vice President Mike Pence is going to be there. So take it away, sir.
Great, thank you, sir. Good morning to all. So this is a very unprecedented kind inauguration that we would have on January 20th. We are in a complete lockdown. As Sree ji mentioned, we have pretty close to 25,000 National Guard and troops guarding pretty much every nook and corner of the Capitol. FBI is doing extensive testing of people coming in. The army is validating, the background of everybody, including the National Guard and its own internal troops, just to make sure that there are no issues. Why? Because there's a perceived threat that there could be somebody internal who could instigate a problem. Now, whether this is all real or whether it is being, revved up, but these are facts that have been put out to the press. There won't be any public, it's virtual. The event is virtual. We are also in the middle of pandemic, and United States has seen, pretty close, more than 300,000 deaths. So there's also that somber kind of a moment not to have, significant. So what will happen is that the event will kick off with, the president being sworn in. After that, with the members of his clergy doing the invocation. And then basically it kicks off. He gets sworn in as the president. Then after all the events are complete, in a national anthem by Lady Gaga, they would then go to the Arlington Cemetery to place the wreath. Kamala Harris becomes the first, what you call a colored lady to be sworn in as the vice president. So it's a very simple and somber ceremony, well orchestrated. And actually the things kick off today with activities in Washington, D.C., but mostly around the presidential group. Usually the process is that the incoming president is received by the outgoing president at the White House and all that stuff. Given the perceived animosities and given that they don't want to meet each other, there won't be such a meeting. And that part would be represented by Mike Pence in his capacity. So Mike Pence will be very much present at that. There's also a kind of an evening ceremony or evening function with Bon Jovi and Demi Lovato and a host of others hosted by Tom Hanks. I don't know whether you require that pomp and show given the kind of tensions and issues that prevail in the DC. So the whole thing looks, very somber and very unusual, if I have to use that phrase, in terms of this. But elections are complete, all the stuff is complete, whereas parallel investigations are on and all that kinds of activities, and the president gets sworn in.
Yes, and we have a lot of stuff to share with you. Let's go take a look at the first 10 days of the Biden agenda, starting with the 1.9 trillion stimulus bill. We announced the details of that in our previous hangout. Sridharji, anything to add on that? It needs to get approved by the Senate. Now, the Senate is going to start with which one? The stimulus bill or the impeachment? I'm just curious.
I think if I had my, honkers on, then I would say I think they're going to start with the stimulus bill. Because the reason is Biden is, notwithstanding all the things that one perceived, Biden is, he's a career kind of politician. He has been there. So his first priority of business is to focus on, people and the issues. He has laid out four priorities, okay, of which I tend to agree with two of them. One is the COVID, because he wants to have a new director, he wants to have an accelerated program, he wants to bring FEMA Act in, which is Federal Emergency Management Act, FEMA program. So it'll be like treated more than it'll be treated like a pandemic, but also a disaster. So there's an orchestrated program. He wants to have more sourcing, more monitoring, much more active program. He's being supported by Dr. Fauci. He says we can do 100 million vaccines in 100 days. So therefore, that's his proclamation. So that's one priority which I tend to agree. The second priority is the adjacent economic crisis. So which is namely adjacent to that, you have the economic crisis, which is perpetuating in the country. Now, which is the 1.9 trillion, but he's not satisfied just with that. He wants to have, adjacent programs through executive actions passed, right? One is deferment on these student loans, which is impacting, which is one of the election manifestos, deferred program. I don't know whether they will accept to the sign-offs, which they were thinking about, which is to say, we'll sign off all the student loans. That's 1.6 trillion, $1.4 trillion. You're not going to sign off. You're going to sign off parts of it, but then who bears the risk? They would not do it, rather than it's an election stunt. The second thing that they were talking about, the second thing that he was talking about is this, this racial equality. The third he's talking about is Paris Accord. I don't understand how the Paris Accord is a priority. To be candid, we are environmentally safe in the United States. We drink water from the tap and we drive on the roads. We are not wearing masks when we drive on the roads. We are not puffing air. Okay, how can that be an immediate priority? Only he knows, not many people. The second is he's talking about the racial equality crisis. I don't know. I think that the data, which we will cover separately in another program, is that all the kind of what you call as the minority communities, their pay or what you call as the per capita increased during President Trump's period relative to the Obama's period or relative to any prior president in terms of during this particular phase. So I don't know what he plans to do with those specific measures, maybe extend unemployment insurance, etc. He also thinks that there is an imminent and impending crisis of these 11 million immigrants who are 11 million illegal immigrants who are here. He wants to come up with a dual program to normalize. So he has identified through executive actions within his first 10 days, he will pass this. But I can see only two things that are critical, which is being the pandemic and whatever is needed on the economic stimulus.
Now, the reaction for the stimulus plan thus far, people have welcomed the additional $1,400. And the question that has been asked by small and medium enterprises is what happens to the PPP program? There is no mention of that here, isn't it?
Correct. I think you are absolutely correct that the PPP program gets a little bit dunked. If you recall, we critiqued two things. One is $350 billion allocated to local and state administration. This is over and above the $300 or $340 billion allocated in the first. This $350 billion was a subject of huge debate as to why Stimulus 2 was not released. Okay, Stimulus 2 was released, and then eventually it was released without that, and this Stimulus 3 kind of package came in. So that's close to about $700 to $750 billion. So effectively, what they're doing is many of these states which are run by Democrats or liberals, as we call, are bankrupt. They're basically putting money, good money, for a bad purpose to basically block what they have, whittled away by way of precious capital. But who to ask, right? Because now they control the ubiquitous power. If you ask anything, the Democrats will say, hey, you are critiquing. No problem. If you can economically justify it, talk to us and debate us on the data side, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, use the data. Anyway, so I think that's being critiqued. The other thing that's being critiqued is this big money again being put to the schools, which is about, I think, $120 billion. The question that's being asked is, we have already given in the first two programs, the schools are just coming up. What exactly is this money going to be targeted for? Similarly, another $63 billion was allocated. You don't see these numbers here. You see the numbers in the previous presentation. $63 billion was allocated for this whole COVID and healthcare support services. I mean, it's astronomical when you kind of look at these numbers. Mind you, this is not the end. There's more to come with this infrastructure, green and taxes and so on. So I think that there's a lot of adverse reaction. We don't know whether the Senate will pass it as is or will pass components of it. That remains to be seen. Another big issue that has been stuck in this is the $15 minimum wage. Economists have calculated this $15 minimum wage will cost at least 1.3 million jobs. Now, when I look at yesterday, Brian Deese, who is one of the economic advisors, who ran the budget office under Obama, was on Fox Channel, and he was trying to say that all these programs kind of help to improve the unemployment. Chris Wallace asked a question. The unemployment reached 3.2%, lowest in U.S. history before the pandemic. And why do you believe it's around 7.6 right now? Why do you believe that these programs will bring? They had no answer other than to say these numbers are. So there is a lot of criticism around the stimulus that is being put on the table, which is 1.9 trillion. Everybody agrees, by the way, on the $1,400 incremental should go to because that's a direct kind of stimulus. My people are going to spend the money. Similarly, everybody agrees on this $400 unemployment. Barring those two, rest of the numbers really, and also the moratorium for both the mortgage deferred mortgage payments as well as the rental, they agree to that, because which is to say this is the time you need to provide support to people. That those two programs get a big tick mark by way of market response.
Let's move on to the riots update, sir. Alan Dershowitz is a very senior lawyer, very well-respected lawyer. He has mentioned that the House committed 6 violations of the Constitution during impeachment. Maybe we can just touch upon a couple of those main ones, and then there's a lot of stuff that we're going to share about the riots. Stay tuned. This is probably a very significant portion of today's debate. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so here I just don't want to misquote the words. I want to read these words that he has stated so everybody is clear. So he says the Constitution is very clear. The object, the subject, and the purpose of impeachment is to remove a sitting president. And there are only 2 presidents, one when President Nixon resigned and former president resigned, and there was no impeachment. The second, he goes on to cite an 1876 incident when an impeachment was brought against to remove the Secretary of War. In these 2 circumstances, there was precedent in terms of doing it because they were sitting, and once they resigned, then it became redundant. In this instance, he says, the president is no longer in office, So he cites, besides the Constitution being clear, and he also goes on to say the House is basically has engaged in an unconstitutional process of taking up something that is not laid out as enshrined in the Constitution. This is his kind of principal stand. Then he comes to process. In terms of process, there was no investigation by the House Judiciary Committee in terms of what exactly is the specific evidence that they have which constituted this as an impeachable offense, right? You need to have. It is basically saying there was a riots in the Capitol building, there was a speech that was proceeding, he incited the public to do it. Now, is there an independent inquiry investigation that looked into it and said, here's this sentence, here's these words, here is this constitutes free speech, here is this a threat? Okay, it all seems to be political kind of an agenda. This is his view. So therefore, it does not stand the test of principle, process, investigation, evidence, the unconstitutionality of trying a non-sitting president, etc., is the reasons that he has no less than 3 times. By the way, Alan Dershowitz is a known constitutional lawyer, especially around impeachment. He featured very highly in Bill Clinton's time. He also represented, here to be clear, President Trump in the first impeachment trial, right, and which got acquitted, where the President Trump got acquitted in the first trial. So therefore, he is citing these instances, which is quite explicit as to why it has been violated.
Let's move on to the number of House committees that have started looking into this. There are 4 different separate House committees that are looking into this, and the documents are sought by February 15th. So at least there is some concerted attempt to try and get to the bottom of it. What are your thoughts, sir?
Well, I think they have to. The Judiciary, the Intelligence Committee, the National Security Committee, as well as the National Intelligence. I think you have a House Intelligence, Homeland Security, the Oversight and Reforms Committee, and the Judiciary Committee. So all 4 committees, will look at various facets of, the things that went wrong, not just on the riots, but also on what kind of led to the whole gamut of issues, including security breaches, etc., etc. I think, Sree will put up a video which shows a specific incidents that took place. And it's almost like, hey, you're welcome here, to do your sightseeing tour around the whatever chamber, whether it's a House chamber, whether it is a chamber within this gigantic building in the Capitol Hill. Your guess is as good as mine. By the way, this is making wide rounds in Twitter. You can see it. It's not blocked by the Twitter, so therefore we believe the content to be valid.
Here we go, and you can see that this particular individual who's wearing the bullock clothing and Viking like head armor, and you can see his comments and so on and so forth. And as best as we can guess, this appears to be the congressional chamber. We could be wrong about that, but we are sure it is the Capitol Hill. I mean, it is a Capitol building. It is taking place inside this. I've seen the president walk through those doors every time when there is a State of the Union or, this looks very, very familiar. So, like Sridharji said, this has been making the rounds in Twitter, and we just present it for what it is worth. So let's get back to our main image deck. Here I'm going to go back to where we were, sir, and that was that we were looking at the riots update, and I'd like you to continue with Senator Lindsey Graham, who's going to declassify all the Russian investigation documents, which he refers to as fraud. So the whole interference of Russia in the 2016, is this relating to that?
Yeah. So there was this inquiry that was said that, and then that Trump was investigated before and after that there is Russian interference in elections. There's a collusion between Russia and President Trump in terms of interfering and advancing the elections towards, a Trump victory. This was the allegation. So he is declassifying all the documents. He says this is how these people engaged in a game of political victimization, and you should all see these documents, right? Not that it's going to make change, because we have now divided. The nation is divided as Republicans and Democrats, right? So the nation is divided as, you can say, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, right? There's 2 lobbies. Okay, pro-Trump, anti-Trump. So those who are anti-Trump can see, but then they're not going to believe it. It only reinforces the pro-Trump believers that this whole thing is personally targeted at Trump, and this whole investigation, impeachment process, everything. They have harassed him for 4 years. They will continue to harass him until whatever their agenda is, they can get to. That seems to be the path that they are pursuing. People like Rand Paul, Lindsey Graham are laying out the evidence, which is to say, now there's nothing here. Declassify, see it for yourself, right? Whether you believe it or not. At least the world will see it.
John Ratcliffe, the DNI director, has sent in his report to the Congress, wherein he states that China did interfere in the 2020 elections. Could you spare us a little bit of what was in that report, sir?
Yeah. In 2018, we had referred to this previously before. In 2018, there was an executive order passed, which is to state by President Trump that if there is an independent report validated as a foreign interference in U.S. elections, then those elections will be declared null and void. Okay, so this is not one department. This is few departments coming together and coming up and assessing and coming up with a specific recommendation. So I want to read. I don't want to miss any words here. So John Radcliffe assessed that China interfered in the 2020 federal elections, according to a letter that he has transmitted to Congress. In the letter, the Radcliffe alleges that intelligence about China's election interference was suppressed by management at the CIA, which pressured analysts to withdraw their support for the view. Citing a report by intelligence community's analytical ombudsman Barry Zuloff, the director for national intelligence said that some analysts were reluctant to describe China's actions as election interference because they disagreed with the policies of President Donald Trump, quote unquote. Okay, now we'll try to get a PDF and put it on the PGurus website, right? The exact letter. But these are his exact words. So people ask the question, which is effectively to state, what happened to this report? This report was to have been submitted, 1 month after the elections, which is November 3rd to December 3rd. Then there was 45 days, I'm sorry, December 14th, December 15th was the date that it was mentioned to be the date. Okay, so it has not happened, and now you know why the December 15th deadline was not met. He asked for additional time. That report now has been tabled to the House, to the Congress, and once we get a copy in a PDF form, we'll put it up on the website. So you can begin to see lots of things unraveling as things go out. There is also going to be a Senate, now that the power has shifted, but there also is a Senate inquiry committee that is going to look at the electoral reforms and what happened in 2020 elections. Whether anything will come out of it doesn't matter. There's also the battleground states, the 6 states will also do their own independent process. All this may be too late, by way of changing the outcome or by looking into the whole thing. But this is what is underway.
So let's take a quick look at events in and around the globe. The G7 summit is going to be held in the United Kingdom in a seaside resort. And the focus will be, of course, climate. All of a sudden, climate is being discussed a lot. In fact, if anything, for the last 1 year, thanks to reduced activities on the road as well as in industrial production, the air quality must have substantially improved. So I wonder why climate is suddenly now in the front burner. Climate and COVID are to be the focus there.
Well, G7 is an interesting kind of original G7 summit, which was postponed, was to address centralized coordination of central bank monetary stimulus programs so that there is no asynchronous stimulus and asynchronous withdrawal, because they didn't want the economies to be impacted as a result of one rising rates and the other, reducing rates. That was supposed to have been the focus somehow. And the second was some of the G20 nations had tabled to G7. Look, you need to show some more concessions for lesser nations to do borrowing. That was supposed to be the theme, right? Somehow that's just gone out of the window. Okay. Now, it is conceivable that the G7 agenda, the way it works is that people have to work on a consensus. You have the Sherpas, the G7, G20 Sherpas. They work with the people. Now, needless to say, there is a big change taking place in United States. The U.S. will be represented now by Mr. Biden and Janet Yellen. I can only assume the climate accord has come to the forefront. Okay, I'm only speculating here. And natural and basically Canada is another country and China is another country somehow which wants to put this into the agenda. to make sure the United States commits more money. Okay, so the story is that that's the only reason I can think of this Paris Accord coming to the forefront, rather than, I would say, if I had put two priorities, one is COVID, and the second is the continued sustenance of capital infusion, and basically a moratorium, which is around the rate rise, as well as a moratorium around concessional loans to allow smaller economies to kind of regain their momentum. So that should have been the focus, clearly not the Paris Accord.
Quickly on to Guatemala, a new caravan of 9,000 odd people has started moving from Honduras. They are either at the border of Guatemala, or people are saying some about 1,500 have crossed into Guatemala. The total is estimated to be 9,000, and this has happened in the past. How is this one different?
Well, it's according to Fox, and within Fox report, NBC is being quoted, right? The NBC is being quoted, which is to say that these 1,000 number that they mentioned is 1,000 out of the 9,000. Apparently, the Honduras government tried to stop them, but 1,000 have reached pretty close to the border. They say that the Biden administration had promised that they would be, when they seek asylum, they would be granted asylum. They have, this is quoted, which is to say that the asylum was supposed to have been granted. And there's also a communication going back from this unofficial spokesman. This is not the right time to come in, wait, and they don't say, when we'll tell you when the right time is, but it's not the right time. But all this points to the fact that there seems to be some underlying kind of an agenda. I don't know what it is, because these people suddenly don't turn up at the border, right? They do not turn up in the border, and they don't reach out to this refugees and repatriation, refugees and settlement kind of a program. They just don't turn up, randomly. So it's very, again, this is another area which either will be investigated or will be looked at, or, basically, people will turn kind of a blind eye and say, so no, why not? We'll have another 10,000 people. We're going to have 11 million people normalized. So why not another? So we have 9 million people who are below the poverty line. We have 11 million illegal immigrants in this country who needs to be nationalized. We can add another 9,000, 10,000. That would be the kind of the new administration's view. We are very generous. We are very compassionate nation. We care for the people. So I've asked the question, why you put then such stringent conditions for people like me, where I have to go through these examinations and apply for university and qualify myself, and then go through 6 years or 4 years of process to qualify myself after educating myself. I should have been given, if I had educated, within 2 years. So it begs the question around the whole immigration policy, which drove this economy of this country. The economy of this country was built by education, innovation, competency. Yes, refugees and illegal have to be accommodated. But if you're going to formalize this as a process and a method, then it's creating a precedence, right? I didn't mention this. One of the first 10 days programs is basically also to renege and withdraw those put under Trump administration certain countries which travel to and from such countries pose risk. That is another item that is going to be withdrawn in the first 10 days through the executive order. So all this points to the fact that there is a fundamental shift that is taking place. What that holds to the country, we will know in the next 12 to 18 months time.
China is building ground effect vehicles to defend the South China claims. What is a ground effect vehicles, and how is this going to impact the South China? They have all these Spratly Islands, activity around that. They have built artificial islands and so on and so forth. What exactly is a ground effect vehicle, sir?
I think if you recall, we touched a little bit on this when we touched when we talked about the
South China place, the South China and West Asia.
No, Africa.
Horn of Africa, right.
Yeah, the horns of
Djibouti,
Africa.
right.
Djibouti, the horns of Africa. where they have built these multi-tier buildings, right, which is gas lighted and so on, with vehicles, with armored vehicles, which can move in these buildings, which will act as a security barrier, not just purely on the surface, where you have, your armed weapons and artillery and all those kinds of things. So they have kind of in ground, under the ground, bunkers which are built with capacity and which is like a fortress to guard. So I think these ground effect vehicles, they're saying it's not just purely the surface, but they also have got, bunker type facilities to address any kind of imminent threat that is being posed. So in other words, what they're saying is we are in and we are not moving. Like nobody is going to move. So we are going to further strengthen our footprint in South China Sea, and nobody can. This is the brazen. That is why, to me, China's role as a member of United Nations P5, and China as a member of United Nations and member of various international bodies begs the question, and also begs the issue around the business community, notably in the United States, which have refused either on human rights or which have refused to take a position on flagrant violation of universal norms and coexistence with fellow members, right? Any other country is taken to task. But China, they take a soft position. Be it on the West Coast, be it on the East Coast, the position is taken. Have you ever seen businesses in the United States take a position on human rights? No. Have you ever seen businesses take a position on these kinds of sovereignty violations? No. Why? Because I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, right? I can guess what it is, but this is the reason why United States, you pass a UN resolution. When you are doing an act of war in any of these countries, you pass a UN resolution, you move forward. Any of these countries, be it France, be it UK, etc., but not with China. China does not come to United Nations to pass a resolution and seek permission. In fact, we have even talked about ICJ, International Court of Justice, sovereignty violation of the case filed by Philippines. They have been proved wrong, but they refuse to comply.
A few more things happening in and around the globe. We are running out of time, unfortunately. The Dutch police have used water cannon on anti-government protests. You might know that the Dutch government has resigned and new government probably will take shape and place soon. India, Japan have signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to enhance cooperation in the field of information and communication technologies. That's a welcome step in my opinion, because India is now beginning to wean itself away in the event of a Biden administration being less conducive in its approach towards India than the outgoing Trump administration. India's FX reserves surged to 586 billion. Let's touch upon that real quick and then we have to look at markets, sir.
Yeah, well, I think that the Japan is a continuum in terms of the strategic partnership. You can see that Japan is raising its hand. And I think that as United States perhaps takes a different route in terms of its policies, India's strategic partnership will continue to enhance with Japan on all facets, from investments, from security, and from IT technology and communications as an extended kind of cooperation to develop the service. I think we covered, or we didn't cover, I don't know. India is now also training people, youngsters, in Japanese, because Japan suffers from population issues, demographic growth issues. So there's a lot of skilled youngsters who are going to be sent to Japan to augment the human resource challenge that they face in Japan. So the funny thing is, when the Japanese finance minister and the Treasury secretary here made, we want jobless growth, whereas in United States you want what you call full job growth, right? You want employment. We don't want, because we don't have people here, but we still want growth. So this is often the kind of the joke that they play at each other, and India is also engaged in that skill kind of transfer program. Yep.
Global markets, Yellen has committed to market affirmed dollar. This is jargon. Could you please expand what market affirmed dollar is?
What is it saying is that it will not interfere because there's so much of money that is coming into play. It is going to force the dollar depreciation because it's typically the debt is total debt continues. I mean, astronomical debt is going to be added. 5-6 trillion dollars is about close to, we added first, 10% when we launched the first stimulus. Today we are about 2.1 plus 2.1 plus 900, 3 trillion, which is 15% of GDP. And then we're going to add another 1.9 trillion when it gets added. That's 4.9 trillion. So 4.9 trillion is roughly equal to, if you take your GDP to be around 19.5 or 20 trillion, you're talking about 25% debt added in one single year to the total debt of United States. What does it do? It depreciates the dollar. And when it depreciates the dollar, all other exporting countries become totally uncompetitive, and U.S. becomes very competitive to several products, which are protected from imports in several nations. So she is saying, don't be scared. Okay, we are not going to force the dollar down. We will go by the market principles. So whatever the market, however the market prices the dollar, that will be the dollar because the world is pegged to US dollar as the base currency.
Central banks are bracing for more damage to growth as the pandemic lingers on. Already, the rates are close to zero. Are they going to start doing negative rates across the board now?
There are some countries where the rates are negative.
Japan is one, yes.
Yeah, negative. So I think what the central bank, I think this is my point, right? This is a topic that should be discussed in G7. Paris Accord and the environment is not a priority. Okay, so in other words, there's an adjacent group which is below the G7, which is a financial stability group. They should be looking at this as a specific. What they're saying is that, look, there's only so much money that can be. What else can be done between amongst the countries which are trading to make sure that we do not continue to go down the path of asymmetric reduction? There are only two tools. One tool is rates. The second tool is asset purchase. Right? Both these tools have been used quite extensively by the Fed here. Something similar is going on in Europe. If you take India, which is another, one of the big G7 economies, if I have to use the word G7, I'm talking about the top 7 economies by GDP in the world. India is in a kind of a different state in terms of its interest rates. So the question, therefore, is, and China is completely different, though it is in the G7 by being one of the top 7 economies. So the question, therefore, is that do they need to do something different to make sure that there are no impediments? Also, whether there should be some kind of a funding program for all these vaccines and other kinds of things, or whether each nation is left to fend for itself to accommodate. I know Singapore has been giving some aid to countries. India has been giving aid by way of free vaccines. I think they want to think outside the box. This is where they're heading.
Lastly, there's a global wall of cash primed to snap up US Treasuries. Does that mean that the world is seeking refuge in the United States Treasury bills?
They are. In the absence, there's a lot of sovereign funds with plenty of liquidity. Okay, and so therefore, I think that they're working through that process in terms of saying that there is significant demand. And usually, when total debt is added, they do reach out informally. The United States doesn't print and add to the total debt without talking to some of the key members to say, okay, are you going to buy my debt? Are you going to buy my piece of paper? So apparently there's a fairly good number of sovereign funds which are willing to buy US debt. Now that is the message that is coming through. So to again calm the waters, which is to say this is not going to be the debt that's just sitting and going to be by printing cash, but it is going to be funded by external sovereign funds.
That brings us to an end of today's hangout. We'll be back again tomorrow, same time, same places. Sridharji, namaskar, and thanks for joining us. And we'll be back again tomorrow. Namaskar.
Namaste.